next question. Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Jim Larkin, and as a kind of a bridge from Chris's original question there, have either of you ever read Jack Kennedy's Profile in Courage?
I read excerpts of it when I was in college, yes.
Okay, because that answers the question that Chris had asked. I actually have a few questions that stem from what I see as our elected representatives. I think it was conceived that we'd send people to write our laws as our representatives, not to like call in on every issue, but to understand the person, understand the principles of that person, so that way that person votes in a manner that we would if we were sitting in that seat. To that point, I'd like to see conservative constitutional Republicans in the 109th district, and not rhinos and not neocons, right? And as to get an idea of where you both sit on that, I know you've spoken one way or the other on that. And this is going to be to both. Have you ever supported a Democrat or liberal candidate, either financially or in a campaign or written on their behalf? And would you ever do so in the future? Now, there's two other questions that I'd like to ask that kind of stem from the same principles issues. Have you ever directly or indirectly hired illegal aliens, illegal immigrants, to perform any services for you? And thirdly, since you both mentioned about how important and dysfunctional the education system is in New York State, given the high price tag, would you sponsor or author legislation that requires elected officials in the state of New York to send their children to the public schools in the districts that they represent, as opposed to having the liberty to send them to private schools? Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Three questions, yes or no for each one. No, I know. Go ahead, Jim, you're up.
That's a mouthful. I'll start out with the first question here. I believe it was, have I ever supported a Democratic candidate? Have I ever supported a Democratic candidate for office? Was that
the first part of the question? Or liberal candidate. Yeah.
No, I've never supported Democratic or liberal candidates. For me, going back to being a Republican goes back to very early on, growing up under the presidency of Ronald Reagan and seeing what a true conservative Republican was. That is my goalpost for a modern conservative Republican. That's my ideal, and that's what I strive to achieve. As to the second question, have I ever hired an illegal immigrant? To the best of my knowledge, no. I have never hired an illegal immigrant. I'm hard pressed to remember hiring any immigrants per se, but certainly I don't recall ever hiring an illegal immigrant. As to the third question, I would not sponsor legislation that requires elected officials to send their children to public schools, excuse me. One of the things that's important to me, again, as a conservative Republican, is free choice. And I think nothing is more important or foundational for a parent than choosing the education for their child. There's any number of a host of reasons why a parent would choose not to send their child to a public school, whether it be religious, cultural, or other reasons as well. And I think it's inappropriate to make the child go to a school simply for the parent to score political points. I think where your question comes from, though, is the fact of the matter remains, as we discussed before, New York State spends the most amount of money per pupil of the 50 states, and yet our education system lags terribly behind. What we need to do is we need to bring back local control over the school districts. We need to reduce those mandates on those school districts so they can lower the costs and get people moving back into the cities and urban areas so that school districts like Albany, Schenectady, and Troy can actually become good school districts, great school districts again, which I know they're capable of.
Thank you, Jennifer.
With respect to your last question, would I support legislation that would require legislators to elected officials to send their children to public schools? No, I would not support that. I think that I have two children, And I send them to a Catholic school because we are very conservative, and we're Catholics, and I like the fact that they are taught religion in school every day. So I think it's a little bit difficult to require elected officials to give up something like religion in schools when they're trying to serve the public interests and deprive their children of having a choice of, say, getting taught religion in schools. So I would not support such legislation, no. With respect to indirectly or directly hiring illegal aliens, not to the best of my knowledge, no. I have not hired indirectly or directly any illegal aliens to perform, what was it, to perform?
Any services?
No, no. And then, have I supported or ever sponsored a Democrat or liberal candidate? Well, my best friend from high school is Kirsten Gillibrand, and I supported her when she got married to her husband Jonathan as one of her bridesmaids in her wedding. So yes, I did stand up for her when she married her husband in at St. I can't remember the name of the church in New York City, but it was a Catholic church, and I was one of her bridesmaids. So yes, I guess you could say I have supported a Democrat. But I've also worked, when I was in college at Georgetown, I worked as a volunteer for the campaign of senior George Bush. And that was something that in 1988, in the spring, as a senior in college heading to law school, that was a wonderful experience for me as well. So I think in evolving, you try to get, as a youngster, a lot of good experiences, but I was definitely pulled to working for a Republican. My great-grandmother was Niagara County Republican vice chairman in the 50s and 60s, and I was told by my grandmother that if I ever registered anything but a Republican, I was never welcome in her house, and I was 10 years old. So,